Hi, I'd like to give my little summary for the class, as well as talk about that video and why I play it in this section. The Milgram video is basically talking about why Stanley Milgram, a social psychologist, was interested in the question of why people would participate in something like the Holocaust. Why these guards, why these other people wouldn't have balked at what they were doing. And so he wanted to do an experiment. And so he saw that by simply applying a little bit of social pressure, either in the form of authority or group pressure or other things, that people would typically conform and conform in ways that was extreme. I mean, people would literally kill other people if they felt like they weren't responsible and it was, there was pressure from the group or the authority. Now, the reason I bring that up is because what happens is oftentimes that's the way a lot of us live our lives, is we take the authority we're given and we run with it. Our boss tells us to do something, we do it. And we don't really see ourselves as being autonomous and having the ability to direct our own decision making. Rather, we consider ourselves sort of cogs in the wheel, and thus we're not responsible. Well, the case is that a philosophy course, and the whole goal of this course is to get you to think. That's our entire goal. And we want to teach you a little bit about metaphysics and get you to question some of these things. But the overall goal, years from now when you can't remember what utilitarian and deontological and the different metaphysical theories are, I would at least hope that the idea that, there were good arguments one way and good arguments the other way, and that you were critical and that you were evaluative of the arguments very carefully, that would in fact remain. And that's what we're hoping to teach you. There's an old saying, I don't even know who said it, but there's an old saying that, my convictions often change, but my conviction that I am right never falters. And I always like that, because oftentimes what will happen is we will change our opinion, but we're always convinced 100% we're right. We're convicted that we are right. But what happens with philosophy is we try to teach people that there's good arguments for everything and there are good arguments against everything. And so you need to be willing to be critical and evaluative of your own opinion. And don't be so convinced you're right, because there are good sides on the good opinions on the other side. If you're a Democrat, that's fine. But there's also good arguments for being a Republican. And if you're a Republican, don't be convinced there aren't good arguments for being a Democrat. I mean, it goes back and forth. There is no one way or the other. And that goes with all types of issues. And so we hope that you will be critical of your own view and question it. And that comes back to the video. Is don't just take because somebody told you something and go, oh, well, that must be the way it is. I was told to do it. But rather to be critical of it. And the reason why that is important is because if you are going to go out and get a job, if your goal is to get a job and work in it the rest of your career and do one thing, then maybe you don't have to have any critical skills. But if you want to move up into a leadership role and get paid more, you do. And the other thing is, and I said if you want to go out and get a job and do the same thing the rest of your career, the reality is that's unlikely to happen. Computer programs change, ways of doing things. I mean, the way medicine was practiced 20, 30 years ago is completely different than the way it's practiced today. The way business runs, I mean, everything's computerized. The computer systems change. Businesses have opened, grown to billion-dollar industries, and then closed. Things like, 20 years ago, there was no such thing as AOL, or it was just a fledgling internet dial-up company. It bought Time Warner, one of the largest cable providers, and declared bankruptcy, all within 20 years. I mean, the world is constantly changing. And your ability to think and evaluate and to change your opinion and to see the problems and the faults and what's going on and not just continue down the same path because that's what your boss told you to do and that's what you've always done, that is what philosophy is trying to do. As one last example of this, several years ago, there was a Marine from a small town in Central Illinois, just south of Champaign, and a very small town, like 800 people, 400 people, and he had been in Iraq and had served there, and he came back and he left the military, honorable discharge, whatever, and he decided he was going to try to join the Secret Service. Well, as part of the Secret Service test, they have you answer a question under a lie detector. But beforehand, they'll do a pre-interview to set up their questions, and they ask, what's the worst thing you ever did? Or what's the worst crime or the worst thing you ever did? And he said, well, the worst thing I ever did was, and he recalls an event that happened in Iraq, in Fallujah, the Battle of Fallujah, a very long insurgent-driven battle. And he tells them about how a couple of their friends, a couple of their comrades, a couple of their unit mates had been killed in an attack at a checkpoint. And he, I believe that was the way it worked, and he had decided, or they had been sent out to try to find the people responsible, to try to find the insurgents. And they were searching home to home, and they got to a home that had both women and children, and possibly the insurgents. And they radioed in, and they said, well, we have them detained. And the commander radioed back, have you eliminated them? Giving a tacit order to kill them. And so they proceeded to kill everybody in the room. So I say that to say that this is, in fact, something that still can happen and does happen, something as atrocious as the Nazis. I mean, killing a room of children and women simply because you were upset. I mean, it's understandable to a certain degree that emotions run high, but then a commander tells you to do it, instead of saying, I can't kill innocent children, I can't kill women, they just proceed to do it. That man eventually was through a process of the ready reserves. You can be reactivated into the military without your permission for so many years after you leave, and he was, because the Secret Service had to reveal this to the Marines, so they re-enlisted him and then immediately charged him with a court-martial for this crime, so they could try him in a military court and possibly send him to military prison for the rest of his life. He ended up not being convicted because there was no evidence other than his testimony that he had given or the information he had provided previously. There wasn't enough evidence that this had happened, and so they ended up not convicting him. But then he pretty much has said, last I had heard, he was going to stay in the military for the rest of his life because he realized that he would not be able to have a career in the private sector. They had re-enlisted him, so he was a member, so he could stay in at that point. So, whole point though is whether it be something like a military situation or a job that is in a changing world, you have to be willing to be critical, and that's what we hope you get out of this. Is not just to accept your opinion is right, not just